Hello, this will be part 5 in the series An Ancient Legacy, and it's about how units of weights and measures connect supposedly separated cultures, and that well, we can literally weigh and measure some of these things, but also how that legacy has carried on throughout the years. So we have the megalithic period, then we are moving through up until the Greco-Roman period and how that still continued until this very day. But last episode was home next to the sea where we saw the Seahenge structures. Now I'll do a quick recap because I'm going to do a lot more connections and so again the focus of how units of measure such as the so-called modern English foot is actually been found in the Salamis stone and the Parthenon and other places going back at least 2,500 years. But also in previous episodes, the Great Pyramid and how the Sumerian or the Indus foot connects directly through the pendulum, just the same way that the 1 meter 1 second pendulum connects the Royal Egyptian cubit, which so we defined both the base of the pyramid itself as well as the sockets at the corner, which all emerges from these measures. Now, in previous episode where I was on Seahenge, so we had 1.2727 rods and how this through the Sumerian Royal Babylonian cubit connects. And again, like I did a recap on an earlier series in Sanchi Stupa, the Parthenon, how the Parthenon itself has these proportions, even the measurements which emerge from here. For instance, this the columns themselves would be 37.7142857142857 repeater, which is 22/7, or pi as a whole number approximate times 6/5. But I'll get into more in that because these things just keep feeding in on themselves. And of course, how Sanchi Stupa, not just by the measures themselves, but also by definition proportions, incorporates Great Pyramid proportions, which gives us again pi and phi and these lovely points. And just in case it was we'll connect to the Indus Summa foot, and also how that converts to the Cremona scale, which I did a whole series. That was the Sanchi Parthenon series, and also how all of these things I've done many series on in America, Australia, other places, how modern architecture still resonates with this knowledge, these information, and these proportions in their major public buildings and cathedrals, not some. Just like these major temples of the old age, the major significant temples such as U.S. Capitol Building, the St Andrew's Cathedral, Town Hall here in Sydney, they're always incorporating this same method, and that it's best understood through how ancient units of measure, how they correspond with one another, and just so happen to create these perfect proportions. So again, we'll revisit this, but the Great Pyramid is a three-dimensional object. What we get instead of the half pi 11/7, we get the 22/7, and we'll come to this number shortly, 3.142857142.857, which again is incorporated in these units of measure, because again the Cremona, the Summa, and even the allegedly modern scale of imperial units that we use are all embedded here in Seahenge and others that I touched on as well, but also at these very beautiful numbers. And for instance, Great Pyramid proportions we see there, which are emerging from building into these numbers, and how this connects also to, just so happens to so lovely describe the Earth and Moon ratio. And again, these sort of possibly a reference to the Fibonacci series with 55 oak posts, but just this might be pure coincidence, but that again, 55, really important number. It's the 10th Fibonacci number. It's also the 10th triangular or tetractys number, which means like 1 plus 2 plus 3, etc., up to 10. Also gives you 55. So, and there are many other mathematical, very simple arithmetic that makes it such a beautiful number, and well. Okay, and so again, even the Cremona scale, which I mentioned, but okay, the Salamis stone, it's an ancient conversion tool. It's been found that corresponds to the Parthenon for one, when we have the modern English foot appearing at least 2,500 years ago, and also a perfect conversion point between Doric and Ionic feet. Now this would also incorporate the Samian foot, which is also built into the Salamis stone, which is at a 2:3 ratio, which again connects back to the Red Pyramid and Great Pyramid proportions, and I'll go into some more of those later because, sorry, the Red and the Great Pyramid, but also the Bent Pyramid, and some of these others have the same lovely musical geometric connections, very simple math and geometry, but to create a much broader, through the use of weights and measures, actually then begins to deliver so much more information. But the Salamis stone has apart from the allegedly modern English foot, has the Doric, Ionic, and Samian scale. Both the Doric and Samian will be very important in this particular presentation, so we need to keep those in mind, Doric and Samian. Samian as in Samos, or Pythagoras of Samos, and earlier, so we not just this 27.3%, but also the 295.3125. Previous episode I referenced how some other research had been found this exact same number, just a different unit of measure in other stone circles, such as the rollright stones, which we'll come to those again because this is be part of this presentation, and 2953 being repeated through modern architecture as well. But again, that's to shift a decimal point, and we have not only the synodic month, which is a relationship of Sun, Moon, and Earth, so one orbit of the Moon around the Earth in relation to the Sun, 29.53 days, give or take, so we could actually incorporate the 125 there at the end, but also describes the ratio of distance. So if we multiply the diameter of the Earth times 29.53, or including 125, gives us the distance from the Earth to the Moon, in the same way that multiplying the diameter of the Moon by 108 gives us the distance from the Moon to the Earth. So again, it's these little things, these little harmonies just keep sort of blending in. Now, where are we? Okay, so we'll get to there eventually, but first, so we had a home on the sea, and this one I'm going to be featuring, using these as a sort of touchstones for the moment, the Lone Head of Daviot and Coffey Muir Wood up here in Scotland. Now, in this particular area, what you have are some stone circles, but they're very unique in the way that they're structured, and not only that, the units of measurement as well. And so we'll begin preview. Okay, Lone Head of Daviot. So what you have is like this stone arrangement in the middle with some stone around the outside, creating sort of inner stone circle and the outer stone circle. But you also have these altar type thing going on here. There you can see it as well. So you have basically an altar, recumbent stones they call them, with these two flanking pieces. And that's a unique feature to this particular part of the world. So Lone Head of Daviot, Coffey Muir Wood, Alca Horthes as well. But there's several around there. But what's interesting is that, so the inner circle here, I wish I could get to the millimeter, but all the survey data, all the sites give a reference of 54 feet in diameter. And well, that's interesting because times 2 you get 108 feet. And again, I mentioned the Kingsmen or the rollright stones, which incorporates other knowledge, has astronomical alignments. It's 108 feet wide. Triplet stones, 108 feet wide. Hurler stones, 108 feet wide, including, and these other measurements I'll also feature in later episodes, because again, you're finding these cross-time, cross-cultures across the world, but 108 feet. Salt No, 108 feet wide up there not so far away in Orkney. And there's been some recent evidence seems to suggest that actually in the UK, that it's up in Scotland, and especially around Orkney, that these structures seem to have been built, and then as if the knowledge moved southwards. But okay, famous Stonehenge again, the Sarsen Ring, 108 feet wide on the. There are different ways of measuring. So if you could measure one of these circles from the outside of the stone. Some people measure it from the middle. Some people measure it from the inside of a stone, such as Flinders Petrie. But in each case, they incorporate some really lovely knowledge, and this number 108 being so important. But what else? Back to Mohenjo-Daro, the Indus civilization. The Great Pool is 108 feet wide, 180 feet long, but also the Ashura stones in Japan, 108 feet wide and 108 feet north to south, 72 feet east to west, and that in itself is a 2 to 3 ratio, which again is Vesica Pisces, it's musical scales, it just keeps happening over and over again, surely pointing to a distribution of this knowledge through trade, through weights and measures being the fundamentals of the development of science, of trade, of law, of civilization. You cannot separate the two. So, okay, back to the late. Okay, so 54 feet being half of Stonehenge, all these other ones. Well, that's lovely because it connects to, that turns out to be 31.42857.142, and that's rounded off, so it'll just be repeated decimal places. Egyptian royal cubits, at the definition of 756 feet by 430. But just before we go on, so 31.42857.1. As a reminder, I mentioned that earlier back in towards Sanchi Stupa. There it is. There it is again. You'll see this appearing a lot now. It will vary from proportion, but it also appears in measurement, in this case in Cremona over in Sanchi. But back to the lone head of Davyat. Now, if we define the Egyptian royal cubit as pi over 6 meters, which is my favored method because of the 1 meter pendulum, it's again, so this is pi times 10 within such a narrow margin of error, because we're talking a few mils off on the measurement of this stone. But it's also, so as an example, the one in yellow would be 756 feet divided by 440, and I've rounded off 756 feet. The base of the Great Pyramid on not one side is exactly 756 feet. It varies ever so slightly to a little bit above, to a little bit below 756 feet. Even the, well, there's, okay, that's a nice rounding off, but that's not the exact number. But using this method, again, it would be such a tiny margin if I was to include 756 feet and 1 inch. But my point here is being that we have these two methods and we see how close they are, 1.7181818 and 1.7178, which is 0.003 feet or 9 millimeter, less than 1/10 of a millimeter difference. And to put that in perspective, that's about the width of a human hair, which separates these two. And we want to be as accurate as we can. But just, yeah, so if you see the numbers, you might go, oh, well, they're different. When they are different, but what we're talking about, these margins of, whenever it comes to measurement and this stuff, there's always a margin of error and there's also a margin of definition. If you have a ruler, a foot rule, for instance, or a meter, it doesn't matter. You have a ruler. Well, where is exact, to say, let's use a meter, for example. If you have a meter long ruler, the markings on the, is the meter in the middle of the line, which marks the end? Is it on the inside of a line? Is it on the outside of a line? And in these type of arguments, you're talking the, fractions of human hairs, even lesser. So this is always needs to be taken into account whenever you're dealing with measurement. Another interesting point is that, again, depending on which survey you use, you're getting somewhere between 64 to 66 feet. Again, that was covered in previous episodes. 66 feet reoccurs cross time, cross cultures, which is 60 Indus, Sumerian, or Saxon feet. And again, I'm just highlighting this. I'm not locking that one down, but just to mention, because we do see it so often in so many other places, whether it's 33 feet across Giza, across the Mohenjo-Daro standard street width 33. We find it in, so many places still being used now. House of a Temple in Washington, all these Masonic temples, 33 feet. Again, cathedrals, major public buildings, you find 33 feet just so often that it's clearly there's something going on there. Okay, so perhaps an interesting point, but if you move on, So again, we have the inner circle, the outer circle, and these stones being unique that they have this horizontal and two vertical stones on either side. And also they have a standard width of 20.5 feet, which is 27.33 span. And that just so happens to convert. Remember I mentioned Doric and Samian earlier, and we'll come back to more. Well, on the Samian scale, that's of one Samian chain, 27.3%. Well, within such a small margin of error. So again, that's something worth considering, and we'll get more into that. Why those numbers are so important. This is a screenshot of a paper written by John Hill, and I'll put the link to his YouTube channel. It's shamefully few views and shamefully few subscribers, and he does some really excellent work, actual experimental archaeology, measuring, testing, traveling across, and very important because not only is the altar, let's call it, have this 20.5 feet, but we also find it in the stones surrounding the circle. So between number 4 and 5 and between number 5 and 6, we see it emerging again. It seems to be a standard unit of measure amongst these. Now another interesting, so this defines also the outer ring so often, and just well, one of the features of these circles is again connected to archaeoastronomy here, and these are found in the Recumbent Stones. They're only found in the northeast of Scotland. Characteristic feature, of course, being this horizontal stone flanked by two uprights, usually on the south or southwest arc of the circle. Well, these monuments demonstrate an interest in the rising or setting of the moon in the southern sky at midsummer. So once again, with so many of these sites across the world, especially across the UK and Ireland, they're astronomically aligned, typically to the solstice, so midsummer or midwinter. And these other sites which I've shown before, and we'll look at it, have the same feature there. They're clearly aligned to these very important dates on the calendar, and have these other functions. Typically all this older stuff is just dismissed as a religious artifact. Yeah, that's sort of if we can't understand it, let's just call it a religious thing. Let's just, of course they didn't have science or knowledge, it's just sort of accidentally they just observed, but there's, of course, in weights and measures we're going to find many more connections. It's one of the reasons is calibration of dates, but therefore also calibration of market times and of navigation, and many of other aspects can emerge from this. You can plant and harvest your crops without the use of these things. It's indicating that there is a greater purpose to them, and they're observatories, they're scientific installations. It's just done in a different format. They didn't have the white lab coats and the way we work now. They worked differently, but again, it can be tested, it can be measured, it can be observed. And so we go back to Seahenge, and so again, 273 or 27.3% Samian chain, and that of course connects with these units. And again, we see it in the Cremona chain emerging as well. Now the Cremona scale, as it affects these other, again we'll get 144, 108, 216, 72, all the precessional numbers, and these beautiful numbers in geometry, arithmetic, of course, astronomy and measurement, all embedded in these structures as well. So not too far away we have coffee mule wood, and so again you can just see there the closeness of them. Again, these recumbent stones, which northeast Scotland seems to be, with those horizontals, seems to be like a feature of that area. It's unique to those areas. And again, it's very similar. See the horizontal, the two uprights. And again, same. So between the stones, we have this standard measurement. Therefore, it is important. It's not repeated. They're using a tool to do that. Now, again, I mentioned John Hill's work, and the links will be in there. But he also, with a stick and some rope, how you can measure these things out. And you start with a well, creating a shadow, looking at the astronomical alignments. You can start working out where the uh, equinox, solstice, and those types of things appear, and then using a standard unit of measure where we could again transmit this information and this knowledge. And well, again, it seems we see the same thing: 27.3 span or 27.3%, such as sliver from a Samian chain. Just like the Cremona chain in Seahenge, here we see the Samian chain. And these units of measure, which were embedded in the Salamis stone, the Parthenon, they seem to have much older origin, going much further away, and again connected to astronomically aligned structures that, these were a huge effort to build. You don't just sort of randomly start clunking things together. They did these with a purpose. It was not a shelter. It didn't serve any clear infrastructure purpose. So it had, but clearly that it's astronomically aligned. It's using standard sets of measurement. There is knowledge. There is a purpose beyond the typical. Let's just anything we don't want. We just call it religious. It's a religious artifact. It's not a ruler. It's a religious artifact. I just say it so often in the mainstream. Even archaeologists make a joke of it. Let's just call it a religious artifact because we don't know what it does or what it is. So this is okay. And again, so again, we just see that standard unit of measurement, and we're coming back. Okay, so let's look at the next section. In Finkel's part 1, maybe part 2, drew the connections between the Sumerian and Indus foot through the pendulum, how it describes the Great Pyramid, including the sockets, but also how the Indus Valley people were using a weight scale, so built on 27.33 grams, 13.66, just exactly the same as the gold deben and the copper deben, which were used in ancient Old Kingdom, early period of Egypt, as according to the history book states them. But we do know, so in very ancient, very old, these systems of weights have also been incorporated into that, which is why the importance of those recumbent stones being at 27.3 or 27.3% of the various chain scales on these ancient units of measure, why that's so important. Also, in a previous video, I maybe touched on it in this series, but the use of 82 feet. Now, I'll explain why that's important. Okay, so before I do that, let's where would we be? Okay, West Kennet, Long Barrow. So, okay, might as well point that out as well, just as a reminder, a recap. So the previous episode was on Seahenge, but also the connections between there. So, for instance, at 21 feet, that in Casado, and I'll mention that again in a second, in Carnac in France, but also how the structure itself, the wider complex, let's call it, is 328 feet. The second one that was found was 42 feet diameter, twice that, and we see, okay, West Kennet, Long Barrow, so 328 feet wide, which matches the radius of this circle. West Kennet, Long Barrow also has a passage of 42 feet, which matches the diameter of Home 2. Avebury, the Hermetic alignment in Karnak also seems to have the same system unit of measures going on, and that in itself will, so this is for 108, 144, 432, 216 on this Cremona scale. Again, what is it? The chain scale is there as well. Now back to West Kennet, Long Barrow, and so we have it's 328 feet long. The passage was 42 feet, but the width is 82, and that's a 4:1 ratio. And 82 feet is 27.33 yards of the allegedly modern scale. But as the Salamis stone shows, it at least goes back 2,500 years, and given that the Greeks inherited so much of their knowledge from Egyptians, from India, from Persia, and therefore the Babylonians it starts to become reasonably credible that this has been passed on. Also considering that the Greeks had 27.3 grams as an ounce, just like the copper deben in ancient Old Kingdom, and as well as in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Now that's important because back to these recumbent stones, 20.5 feet multiplied by 4 is 82. So 328 divided by 4, 82. 82 divided by 4, 20 and a half feet. So we see again it's a scale, just like the 13.6 grams, 27.3 grams. It's just double, double, double. In this case, well, times 4, but that's you just double it twice. And so that's another reason why I think and connections, and there'll be a lot more. Okay, I'm just sort of setting up because there are lots of places to consider. Well, so having set that up, this importance of 82 feet. So we have the Archaeum in Russia, 82 feet. Beltany Circle, the Berkrig Stones, now that's 82 feet, 27.3 yards. The inner circle is 29.5. That's same number, we talked about that before. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the Blue Stonehenge, 82 feet, 27.3 yards. The henge itself, 33-foot diameter. Just again, that's the Sumerian or Indus scale. We find it also at Boscawen and Boscadnan, Structure 10 in Brodgar. So again, earlier I mentioned how more and more people are starting to consider that Scotland was the origin of this, and will this come down? And that Structure 10 is 82 by 65. Now I would even consider it 66. I state I don't want to round things off or change it, but we have 65. Again, because of the shape of the building, and when unless you want to be really super accurate in your survey, more often than not, people tend to round things off to the nearest meter, and then it's a bit of a storm trying to source. The importance of weights and measures just really isn't appreciated. 82 feet Temple of Denda. Luxor, 82 feet. Fallen surviving one in Axum. Again, in the Channel Isles. Inca Roads, possibly. Okay, this is, I mentioned Casado earlier, 21-foot long passage, just like Seahenge, which delivers all this other stuff, but it's also 82 feet wide. I covered 98 feet earlier, but that's basically smack bang on megalithic and so many others, but including Cremona, but 82 feet or 27.3. Structure 10, I mentioned at Brodgar, was 82 feet by 65. Maze Howe, astronomically aligned, lots of other information in there, same thing again. The Menga Dolmen in Spain, which is aligned to the summer solstice, and we have a passage of 82 feet there as well. Now, because it's an earthen mound, the exact diameter of it, some say it's 164 feet or double that, and that would also make it 27.3. But since it's an earthen mound, I try to not include them because of erosion, manipulation. It's a bit of a mess there. Persepolis, 82 feet. This pyramid, now that's based on the best sort of estimate. So again, this one's in a question mark. But given the fact that so many other places in South America, Central America, actually incorporate 108 feet, 66 feet, and the same scales we see elsewhere, I think it's worth at least mentioning, if not necessarily written in stone. And the treasury at Petra, 82 feet wide facade. I also have a stone circle in Russia, again, that has a 82 feet diameter. The main shaft at the step pyramid, amongst other several walls at the step pyramid, are 33 feet. The shaft is 82 feet. Aindara, again, just like, so many. Okay, back to West Kennet, Long Barrow. Okay, so of course there's always more. Now the Colosseum, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and the Samian foot, as was in the Salamis stone. What's the height? 27.3 Ionic fathom. In India, so the famous Kailasa Temple, 164 feet or 82 feet times 2. That's the length of West Kennet Long Barrow times 2, so therefore 27.3 fathom. And the very famous, very enigmatic Iron Pillar of Delhi. The total length, including the portion below ground, 27.333 feet once more. Doric Ionic Corinthian, well, Great Pyramid itself, 27.33 Doric rods. Rods being, or a perch, being 16.5 of the feet forming a rod. And that's going to be, I'll come back to that in a moment. Because also, now, this one I'll put a bit of a question mark over, but what we have the descriptions is, so the blocks above the King's Chamber being 5.5 meters, 5.499 meters is 18 feet, but that's 27.3 chain, and that would correspond lovely with the socle for paving stones at 55 centimeters, so, and again, 0.273 chain. Even interesting, okay, we'll go into those more, because, Mohenjo-Daro I mentioned earlier, the Great Pool, 108 feet wide, but 180 feet long, 2.72727 chain. Again, we see these same re-emerging over and over again. The link will be in the description to this, because this one is very interesting as well. And what they've found is standard widths at Monte Alban, so in South America, how these connect, because, well, there's just so many. I'll go to that once I'm through Europe, North Africa and Asia. I'm going to head to the Americas and show how the same patterns emerging. And what he's found is that there are a series of, for instance, 220 feet. Now that's the Viking Scandinavian stone ships. Well, one of the famous was 220 feet long, but what we have here is 330 feet, so 33 times 10. That's converts to Sumerian and Indus feet once more, and also we see 165 in, as seems to be a defining standard measure of there. Well, 165 feet is 0.0273475 royal miles, or the Egyptian royal mile, and it is also in the stade 0.273 stades, and it's again, I'm going through these rather quickly, but what we find is that temples across the world, across time, not only have the same proportions, but these proportions come to very, very significant numbers. Okay, so as a recap, we come back to Seahenge in this 1.272727 or 0.2727, which is the proportions built into the pyramid, which also describe the, well, so much of, but for instance, the proportion of the Earth in relation to the size of the moon. We saw 27.3 grams now in both the Indus and Egypt, going back a long time. And we come back to where was the beginning. The main feature of this presentation was coffee muir wood, and as well as the lone head of Davyat, how the stones, the main feature of these circles, 27.3 or 27.3% of chains in Doric, Ionic, Samian, ancient units of measure. They're always corresponding at all the time, weights and measures, cross time, cross cultures, across the world. And so obviously they're telling something. So even when they're different, it's still the same. It's the conversion between units of measure always come back to these very important, these same points consistently. And we know that for instance, a lone head of Davyat is a moon observatory amongst other things, and of course it's, well, 100. And I'm going to get back to these because okay, I don't think I ever mentioned it. So okay, there's a Grey Weathers. It's a stone circle. I haven't. That's also, there are two stone circles, 105 feet the smaller, 108 feet the larger. Many examples of this of these stone circles, and how they just sort of seem to all come back to these very same beautiful, very important points. And 273. So this is a temple that through it's a moon, let's call it an observatory amongst other things, and so 27.3 or 27.3%, and the moon. What do these have in common? Well, hold your hats. There are basically two of month. There's the synodic month, from where we get full moons, which is an orbit of the moon around the Earth in relation to the sun. And there's a sidereal month, which is one orbit of the moon around the Earth in relation to a fixed star. And that happens every 27.3 days, give or take a little bit, because of the elliptical orbit. However, 27.3% is the relation of size from the Earth to the Moon, as is described in the Great Pyramid. I'm using the ideal measures. You can actually find 27.3 in there, not just 2.272727. So 27.3 days, 27.3% the size of the Earth. Now, at its maximum, 1 AU is the average distance from the Earth to the Sun, and the Moon will be at 0.00273 AU distance, depending on how you met, but well, it's effectively true. Now, the Moon doesn't orbit around the center of the Earth because it has its own mass. It orbits around something called the barycenter, which is 27.3% below the surface of the Earth, which is basically 1,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers. There's one for you. So we see these connections. Now, of course, there's more to it. Now, the Moon is orbiting, but the man on the Moon always faces the Earth, because one moon day or one lunar rotation is equal to one lunar orbit sidereal. So 1 moon day equals 1 moon year equals 27.3 Earth days. That's why the man on the Moon always faces the Earth. During that time, the average is 27.3 degrees. However, because again, the elliptical orbit, there will be periods where the Earth travels through 27.3 degrees of the solar arc. So 360 degrees to go around the Earth, to go around the Sun. And during this 27.3 day period, we will travel through 27.3 degrees. Now, sunspots tend to appear most heavily at 27.3 degrees north or south of the equator, and viewed from the Earth, one sun day, one rotation of the Earth using a sunspot is 27.3 days. Most of these observations could have been done, but also it corresponds because from conception to birth, on average, is 27.3 days, or 10 sidereal months. But 28 days, the menstrual cycle every 28th day, so you could say every 27.3 days. Is this connected? It seems to be more to it than that. This particular number, 27.3, which is embedded across cultures, across time, across weights and measures, is so lovely and connected to well, phi and pi and so many other things. And I will get more into this in future episodes, because this really is just the tip of the iceberg. And with that, I hope you enjoyed and have a good one, and there's a lot more to come. Weights and measures, the wisdom of Thoth and Hermes, science, the ancient science.